In this video, we'll see a little more of the authentication and authorization features used in GAM. Authentication is the process of verifying that users are who they claim to be by validating their credentials. In the case of GAM, username and password. It's possible to implement different types of authentication, and even more than one can be enabled simultaneously. The types are local, where the user's credentials will be stored in the GAM database in the user table. Another option is to use an identity provider. There are several identity providers that can be used, such as Google, Facebook, Instagram, Office 365, and so on. In these cases, the GAM database will only store the user's ID in the user table. This is used to assign, for example, a user's role. And then the user's credentials will be managed by the selected identity provider. When users are authenticated, they'll be redirected to the identity provider, where they'll enter their credentials. If successful, this provider will return to the site again. If external authentication is used, GAM must be configured to interact with an external provider, which may use web services or another customized mechanism. In this case, as in the previous one, only minimal user information is stored in GAM, since the validation of access credentials is carried out in another system. In these cases, GAM facilitates mapping the roles defined in GAM with the external roles. We can also use remote GAM, since GAM itself is an identity provider that will handle the user's credentials. Therefore, we can set up an application using GAM to validate the user's credentials in another GAM instance that will play the role of identity provider. To perform the authentication, GAM will provide two objects: a web panel for the web, and a panel, which in this case will be used for mobile. These panels can be customized if necessary. In particular, for mobile, inside the folder GAM Examples, we'll find the folder GAM Front End, and inside it, another folder named GAM Mobile, with objects that handle login, password change, registration of new users, or user data updates. For example, this is the login panel, GAM SD Login, which implements events to handle the login and registration of new users. An important aspect of this panel is that when the mobile application is offline, this panel must be executed online, which means that the user must have a server connection to access it. With GAM, we can also handle authorization, which is the process of verifying whether a user who has already been authenticated has the necessary permissions to perform some action in the system. For this, GAM has a scheme based on user roles. Each GAM user has one or more associated roles. In addition, we'll have secured resources and the assignment of permissions on these resources to the roles. The resources that can be secured are web panels, web components with URL access enabled, processes with HTTP protocol, for example, reports with PDF output, transactions. In this case, we can not only execute, but also customize the insert, update, delete mode, or give full access to a transaction. In the case of online applications for mobile devices, the resources to secure are panels, work with, processes, or data providers with REST protocol. In the case of offline applications for mobile devices, we'll only have authentication. Since the application is offline, we'll not be able to keep the permissions, given that if we modify them, some devices may not synchronize, thus making the scheme unfeasible. To manage all this information, GAM provides a web backoffice, which will allow us to manage users, roles, permissions, and other application settings, such as authentication types and other configuration parameters. One of the advantages provided by GAM is that for every application, it'll generate the resources on which the permissions have to be given. We can see that on one hand, we have the permissions of the attraction transaction. We have one for each mode: insert, update, and delete. And also one for the execution. And another one that says full control. Then we also see that there are resources named attraction services. These refer to the transition when it's used as business component and exposed as REST, or when it's used in the work with object. When selecting a role with full control, we're giving all permissions on that transaction execution and each of the modes that will be shown as inherited. Let's take a look at what we've talked about in Genexus. In the KB that we're seeing, we've previously set the Enable Integrated Security property to true in the knowledge base version node. And we left everything by default, so the security level is set to authentication. Now we'll change it to authorization. After changing this property, we have to do a rebuild all of the application. So now our application is ready to not only authorize, but also authenticate users. That is to say, manage their permissions. First, we're going to execute the GAM home object, which must have the main program property set to true, so that we can execute it directly. It'll ask for login, so we use the only user that we've created by default, admin, and the password admin123. We select to enter the GAM back office. Go to the Users section, where we can create or edit the user's information. Then we have roles, where we can define the roles we want. By default, there are 2 roles defined. The administrator role has access to all the functionalities of the backend, as well as to permissions on all the objects of the front end. The other role is unknown. This role is used when we allow users to self-register in the application. That is, self-registered users are associated with this role. We can change the default role used in this case. And in this menu, we have access to the whole GAM configuration. Here are the applications. Note that in this case, there are 3 applications defined. The GAM application, containing the whole GAM backend, the web application, and the mobile application, which in this case have the same name. We're going to edit and change the mobile one to distinguish them. From the menu, we can also configure, for example, the administration of the authentication types we mentioned. By default, local authentication is used, but with add, we could add another type. And here we choose the type we want to add. There are security policies, and we'll see how the default policy is configured. For example, for mobile, we can select the expiration time for security tokens. Here the period is in days to force users to change their password, minimum password length, and so on. There are many parameters that we can predefine, and we can create several policies, including one for back-office users, another one for mobile users, and so on. We can manage it in a flexible way. Now we're going to create a new user. We go to Users, Add, enter Training as username, and as email, we enter training@genexus.com. We set the password to training, confirm the password again, set the first name to training and the last name to Genexus, and leave the rest as default. Finally, we assign a policy, the only one we have, and confirm. In our KB, we've created a menu object set as startup object, and with the following work with objects as items, the country object, and the attraction object. When executed, it opens the application in the emulator, and the first thing it asks for are the access credentials. We enter the user that we've just created, user training, and the same password. And there we can access the menu with the items that we had entered. In this case, the menu does not require special permissions, and we can see it if the user is authenticated. But if we want to access the options, such as the attractions, it shows a message indicating unauthorized access. It's the same for countries. This is because we configured the application at authorization security level. But we haven't given any authorizations to the user yet. We just created it. Let's go back to the web screen to handle these permissions. Now we're going to create a role. We enter the mobile role with the description mobile user. We also associate a policy with the role, and we confirm. All right, now we need to access the role and give it permissions over some resources. We select the travel agency application and select Add. There it shows a list with all the resources over which we can give permissions. We're going to add one to access to the attractions. So we look for attraction and select Attraction Services Full Control. When selecting Full Control, we see that all the permissions on the attractions will be inherited. We click on the username, then on Roles, on the Add option, and select Mobile. Add selected, and that's it. If we go to the emulator and access the attractions, the list will be displayed. Also, we can enter in insert mode if we want to, since we gave it full permission. Now if we go to countries, it shows an unauthorized access message. This is because for countries, we've not given any permissions yet. For example, we may want permissions not to be checked for countries. Then, in the country work with, we can use the option to only authenticate. Another option would be to set none. Let's run the application so that it takes this change. If we access countries, it'll show the list. This was just a small sample of all the flexibility that GAM provides to manage user authorization and authentication. Remember that authorization is only for online applications.